Good evening and welcome to Colorado Decides, a joint production of PBS 12, CBS 4, and the Colorado Sun. I'm your host, Dominic Dezzutti. Joining me is John Frank from the Colorado Sun. We continue our look at the major initiatives on November's ballot. Tonight's debate will examine both sides of Proposition 116, a ballot issue that would cut the state income tax rate from 4.63% to 4.55%. Joining us for the next 30 minutes are John Caldara, president of the Independence Institute, in support of the measure, and Scott Wasserman, president of the Bell Policy Center, opposing the measure. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being here. Since we have limited time, let's get started. John, why don't you start us off?
When it comes to a complicated tax policy, why don't we start with the basics? John, why does Colorado need a lower income tax?
Colorado is trying to recover from COVID. We're experiencing a recession. Now is the perfect time to energize our economy by giving people a bit more of their own money. Let them save some of their own money. It's one of the reasons why Governor Polis said that now is the time for a tax cut and that the people of Colorado need some tax relief now. I agree with him. This is a mild tax cut that will help all Coloradans and help them all equally.
And Scott, talk to us about why you oppose this measure, why we should keep the income tax where it is at 4.63%.
Sure, John. I think the question that we have to ask is who exactly is this measure helping? If you're one of the many Coloradans who make an average salary or income of $47,000 a year, you're going to get at best $37 back with this measure. And what you'll get with that $37 is school cuts, broken infrastructure, and an underfunded state. If you're a millionaire, you'll get $800 back, which I think we can all agree a millionaire doesn't need, and they'll do just fine with the cuts that ensue. At the end of the day, cutting $160 million more from this budget that's already suffered from 25% reduction because of COVID is going to make life in this state much more unequal and much more expensive for Coloradans.
If I could. It was interesting that when you were pushing what was called the fair tax, a progressive tax, you said this was great because it gives 95% of Coloradans a needed tax cut. Well, this gives them a bit more of a tax cut, and that's an important thing. And while you might scoff at $40, and actually it's a lot more than that when you take it in whole, there are people out there for whom $40 does help. And John, I love the argument about millionaires. You know, that we can't do this because guess what? Millionaires will get an equal tax rate cut as well. Well, why is that? Why is it that a millionaire is going to get such a greater savings from this? Because they pay so much more in taxes.
Well, I'm really glad that John mentioned Fair Tax Colorado because I and many others are trying to change the conversation in the state because we have asked for a very long time what people are paying, and what we're not asking is who is paying what. And one of the things that I think was absolutely shocking, and I think it's shocking that people aren't as shocked, is that only 3% of the state actually makes over $125,000 a year in taxable income. So at the end of the day, we have unfairness baked into our system. We know from state reports, we also know from national reports that the wealthiest Coloradans pay less as a percentage of their income than low and middle income.
In fact, the Colorado tax profile study that the Department of Revenue just did showed that there is one progressive tax out of the cigarette tax, this tax, that tax, and that is our state income tax.
So John can distort the data all he wants, but what we know is that when you look at...
I have the data right here.
Let's go one at a time. We have plenty of time for this stuff.
The data right here. So according to the Department of Revenue...
I wasn't made aware that there would be a chart section. I'd be happy to roll those charts out.
If it helps, no one can see what's on that page.
And with my memory, it's good to have these. It's interesting that you're right. There is unfairness in our tax code. You're right. There are people on the lower end who pay more of their income to taxes. But that's not true with income tax. In fact, according to the Department of Revenue, they pay more in sales tax, gasoline tax, car registration, alcohol, tobacco. but they pay lower end people, lower income people pay less. So I'm assuming.
I think it's
Scott's
important to
reaction.
respond
Scott?
to this. When we talk about people in this state paying more of their income in taxes at the bottom and the middle, what we're talking about is taxes in aggregate in the state. When you look at sales tax, when you look at property tax, many of the questions that will be on the ballot. And income tax is one of the things that 37 other states adjust in order to balance for that, including the federal government. We are one of only a handful of states that have a flat tax, something that is absolutely ingrained in your constitutional measure known as Tabor. I think Coloradans have a right to understand who is paying for what and who suffers the most when government is underfunded because of our inadequate and unfair tax system.
Then let's be clear. Out of all the taxes that people pay in Colorado, the one tax that is actually progressive, where people on the higher end pay more, is the state income tax.
And so you're willing to ignore all of the other taxes that people pay in the state.
In fact,
and then you're going to lower
Not
the
at all.
income tax for the wealthiest, and they will benefit. And the cuts that will ensue, because I can't wait till we get to actually talk about the cuts that will ensue, will actually impact the people who are least able to deal with that. But you know what? Millionaires will get their $800. So that's fantastic.
What you said is this class baiting that millionaires will get more money because they pay more money. And if you deny that the Colorado flat income tax is actually, in effect, a progressive income tax where rich people pay more of a percentage of their income, then you should talk to the Department of Revenue because you're obviously at odds with them. So here's the other part. If we want to talk about helping people at the lower income scale, we've got all sorts of taxes on this ballot. We have a property tax, which inordinately hurts lower income people according to the state. I'm assuming you'll join me in telling people to vote no on Proposition B, which will raise that. There's a cigarette tax on there, and overwhelmingly poor people pay so much more. So you're going to join me. You're going to join me.
Talk
Let's
about
get
all
response.
the other.
John, let's
voting
get response.
against that too.
Scott, go ahead and respond, then I'm going to jump in here because at some point I want to
I
speak
think
to.
it's lovely that you want to expand this debate to talk about all of the other measures on the ballot.
Are you opposing those tax increases on poor
I think
people?
what we need to talk about is that we have an inherently.
Are you opposing those
John,
tax
let him
increases on
finish.
poor people?
Do you think that our entire tax system
I'll
is
answer my
fair,
question.
and do you think millionaires need a tax break
tell you what,
right
I
now?
will answer
John,
that.
let him finish the question.
I'll answer
You
that.
usually host a show on Friday
answer
nights.
that if you
Let me
answer
actually
mine,
host
and I'll
this
answer
one.
it second.
Let me host this one. So let's step back for a second about some big picture. It's going to cut the state tax from 4.63% to 4.55%. How much money is that actually going to take away from the state coffers total? Not talking about a millionaire or someone making $47,000. Total amount of money away from the state budget.
The answer is none, because we've already paid for this tax increase. Governor Polis said, I'm going to cut loopholes in tax credits on rich people, and I'm going to give a tax cut. That's what this does. This year alone, we passed two bills between medical reinsurance and depreciation that's bringing in $170 million more a year. This tax cut is $160.
How does this not cut any? Let me just get this answer from you. How is there going to be no less money going into the state coffers if the state income tax across the board is cut?
No, I understand. You'll say that this is going to be a cut to the budget of $160 million or so. All right, but we need to do that in context. Context after year of tax increases called fees, from the hospital provider fee to the FASTER fee to the mill levy fees. Let me finish. Plus, the Trump tax code is now bringing into the state $400 million a year more than before, because it has the opposite effect on state taxes.
Last year, Dominic, last year, our state legislature cut 25% of the state budget, reducing provider rates, cutting higher education. Our negative factor in this state, right, the amount that is constitutionally obligated to go to education, right, we now owe $1.3 billion to that standard. We are cutting vital services that make life more affordable for Coloradans. He can mix and match the numbers any way he wants. We only just barely recovered from the Great Recession right before the COVID pandemic hit, and now our budget has cratered, and we are back to pre-Great Recession levels in the state.
Of course, raising taxes is the best way to pull out of an economic hard time.
It's not raising. This wouldn't even.
Well,
this is not going to be a raise any
No,
tax.
but the argument goes, if a tax cut is bad, then a tax increase must be
No,
good.
there's a neutral ground.
Well, all right, we're going through a couple things, and I really do want to ask a question. I just want to get this question out, which is, you keep saying this is about helping poor people. Then I am assuming you join me in opposing the cigarette tax,
John,
family. Let me finish the question.
No, this isn't. First of all, we're here to debate Proposition 116. The questions are coming from this panel.
What I'm hearing.
John, we actually have other people here to ask some questions. John, Frank, I want to get you involved so we can keep this going, because as a natural host of the program, you can go on this for another half an hour. I know this style. John, jump in here.
Let's talk about some numbers that are facts, written by legislative counsel, independent experts. Both sides are throwing out numbers that certainly benefit themselves. At the Colorado Sun, we like to do the math too. And so here's what we know for sure, is that in the first year of this full tax cut, if it is approved, it would cost the state $158 million, $158 million less for state services. In the second year, it'd be $170 million less for state services. The average taxpayer in Colorado would save $42, according to independent analysts. And those making $50,000, it's about $40. Those making $100,000 a year save about $80 a year. And those making $250,000 is about $200 a year. Those are the facts. We know those numbers for sure. Scott, I want to start with you about some of these impacts. Governor Jared Polis has made some remarks in favor of this, suggesting that, it's a tough time out there right now, and folks could use a little more money in their pockets. So why don't you agree with the governor on that?
Well, for starters, I think where the governor and I have a difference of opinion is who needs tax relief. As was mentioned, yes, we would agree that 97% of Coloradans should get some form of tax relief, but not at the cost of the kinds of services like roads and schools and healthcare and a whole litany of other things that we all count on to live our lives, be you poor or middle class or upper middle class in this state. At what cost does that come? So if you look at Proposition 116, it's a basic cost benefit analysis. I think we're asking Coloradans to do the math. You can have $40 back, but will that $40 build you a road? Will that expand a highway? Will that pay for teachers? Colorado is 51st in the country for teacher pay, right? So this is only going to make that worse. So I think there's a cost benefit analysis that needs to be done. And, some Coloradans may say, I want that $40. I think we know that far more Coloradans believe that at the end of the day, they want better schools, better roads, and they know that that $40 in their pocket is not going to change that unless it's invested in our communities.
John, just a couple of years ago, you ran a ballot measure.
Can I make a response on that?
Yeah, let me ask a question, and you're welcome to respond to it. Just a couple of years ago, you ran a ballot measure trying to mandate certain level of transportation spending. You want more transportation spending. So why do you now want to take money away from the state that could go to transportation?
Let's take a look at this. When Scott talks about we need to do something that's more just for poor people, let's remember there are four things.
I just want to make clear, and it's just interesting kind of baiting going on, this idea that we're arguing for government services. I would love to respond to what you continue to say. This isn't about poor people. This is about people all across income spectrums that rely on human services, schools. They're part of their communities. Full-day kindergarten, incredibly popular program that I think helps people that aren't just poor.
But I get a shot at this.
The exact cost of full-day kindergarten is almost nearly that $160 or $170 million. So is that something that Coloradans want to take away?
All right, let's get to John. Let's get to John's answer.
Let's get this one point across. I find it so disingenuous to say that we need to help the poor with this. There are 4 tax measures on this ballot, and 3 of them screw the poor. The poor hurt with payroll taxes. The Family Leave Act increases that tax. Proposition B is property tax. They pay the most in property tax as a percentage of their income, and they pay the most in cigarette taxes. So these are all tax increases on the poor. Now, what Scott obviously wants is just more taxes, not something to alleviate the poor. Let me continue. So the question is, what is this going to hurt? Scott says, well, we're going to take away money from roads and we're going to take away money from education. Really? Why aren't we talking about closing some loopholes? Why is it that we have a tax credit for rich guys to buy Teslas? Why isn't that the first thing we say? Maybe that's what needs to go.
Let me ask a follow-up to that, because there's an assumption that there are all these loopholes to come up with another $160 million. But we also need to remember, if everyone else is going to be hurting from COVID, so will state government coffers. So they may indeed try to close some of those loopholes just to make up from losses from COVID. So this is still going to put a $160 million dent. If I'm getting $40 back, that is not going to cover a new alignment for my car driving on crappy roads. I would rather see money spent in transportation, and I can see other Coloradans, regardless of where they're at in the aisle, feeling the same way. How do you know that a loophole is going to be just fine and make up $160 million?
Let me put it this way. We keep increasing the size of the budget. This budget is over $40 billion. $40 billion of state spending minus $150 million is still about $40 billion. But what no one seems to want to talk about is the amount of money that's been coming into the state as tax increases that we never voted on, including the Trump tax code, which is bringing in $400 million.
The things that keep the reoccurring
let him finish, Scott. I'll get you a second. Let him finish. We'll go to you,
between
Scott.
$400 million that Coloradans are losing from that, which there was a bill to lower our tax rate to make that revenue neutral. Jerry Sonnenberg put that into the hopper. It didn't make it out of the democratically controlled committee. So he and I are putting this on the ballot. It only brings back a little of what has already been taken. Yes, we've paid for this tax cut, this tiny tax cut, time and time again.
Scott, let me get to you the question. You can respond. It's easy to get to the point of, okay, this top 3%, and people I think could imagine Phil Anschutz and like, oh, well, he can certainly afford it, and $800 isn't going to help him do much. But there's a lot of people that would be getting a significant tax cut that are small business owners, that are people outside the metro area that would actually benefit from this. So it's not just millionaires we can probably think of. Is a tax cut fair for everybody except the top 3% income makers in Colorado?
I mean, I think the question, and that's why I opened up saying, like, who does this help? I mean, at the end of the day, a millionaire would laugh at the notion that $800 is to his or her benefit. They don't need that $800, right? Now, if you're a billionaire, which we have a few of in this state, I would imagine they're going to see some pretty big tax cuts. But at the end of the day, for 97% of Coloradans, it goes back to that fundamental cost-benefit math that you just did. Great, $40, maybe he's going to pay for dinner, versus crappy roads, deteriorating infrastructure, underpaid teachers, and strained schools, right? So at the end of the day, I guess it begs the question, why? Why do we have this tax cut on the ballot? And I think the real reason is it was a response to a proposal to make our tax code fairer, to raise the kinds of income we need from wealthier Coloradans who can afford it, so that we can fund the things that people count on. I think there's a theme that keeps coming up when we hear our friend John talking, and it's this othering of government, right? That government is somehow this foreign, entity that's just stealing money from you and me. These are our elected representatives, right? These are the people that we send, and we tell them we want better healthcare, we want better roads, we want better schools. They try to make it work, and they have to deal with the kinds of games that get played where it's like, oh, it'd be fun, let's put a tax cut on the ballot, and let's try to make their jobs already harder. We just got the state revenue forecast back, and there's a little bit of good news. The economy's recovering. We're still going to have to cut $1.3 billion from our state budget. If we do this, it'll be 1.4.
Actually, the new numbers came in, and it's a lot better than that. What we thought was a reserve fund, which was only going to go down to about 400, is now going to be over $1 billion in a reserve fund. The point being,
why are you talking about the reserve fund?
I believe.
We have to cut. John, how do you think we should?
John,
how should we cut the $1.3 billion from the state budget?
Do you support cutting the tax credit for rich guys buying Teslas?
Do you support?
I asked you a question.
How do you want to cut? I asked you a question first. How do you want to cut $1.3 billion from our state budget?
Guys, we actually have somebody in charge here to ask questions. It'll be John and myself. So, John, go ahead.
And this ballot measure is about lowering the income tax, not all these other taxes. But I do want to interject real quick here, because facts matter for us here at the Colorado Sun. The state budget's about $30 billion.
That's correct.
When you take out reappropriated funds. Of that, lawmakers spend about $11 billion a year. That's the discretionary money. That's the income tax money. A lot of the rest of that is federal dollars out of their control, so I want to set that straight. Also, there's no guarantee the Gallagher Amendment would increase property taxes right away, but we're not here to debate that. And you are correct in that cigarette taxes do affect lower-income people more because they are the ones that use cigarettes more often. Let's get back to the question you did not
payroll-
answer
and
a
the
moment
pay-
ago,
and the
John,
payroll tax?
which is how do you pay for better roads if you keep cutting the money the state needs to build
can't-
those better roads?
I can't tell you how much I object to this idea that we keep cutting taxes. Our taxes keep growing because of the loophole found around Tabor that the state can do all these fees and raise billions of dollars without asking voters for consent. We've paid for this tax. The Trump tax code
Fees are
should-
not taxes, as we debated last week. Those fees
tell
go
the guy
to very
tell the
specific-
guy in the hospital that it's a fee that's optional. Tell the guy who's paying his car registration tax that it's optional. It is not optional. It's a tax increase that our beloved legislature did without a voter approval. And we keep glossing over the windfall that is the Trump tax code to Colorado. Since the tax base grew under this, the federal government lowered the rate. But the state government with this larger tax base did not lower the
Trump
rate.
tax cuts tilted our tax code overwhelmingly in favor of the wealthy. We
Not
know
in Colorado.
and we know because
Not in
and this is
Colorado.
interesting. I mean, there are, and this is a separate debate that we should have at a future time, but there are loopholes that we ought to close, and we ought to make sure that the benefits that went through pass-throughs in this state, because we're coupled with the federal tax code, that we take away those benefits and that we make sure that rather than giving tax breaks to wealthy businesses or individuals in this community, that we actually pay for the things
Can we
people
get
need.
a quick fact check from Mr. Reporter
Can
that
we
the
get an
Trump
answer?
code is bringing in $400 million that otherwise wouldn't have happened without it?
The Trump tax code is bringing in more money. It's partly why the budget's growing that you're citing. We're
Right.
also growing as a state.
Right.
We've got, so there are more people
And the
demanding the
reason-
services. That's why the budget's growing.
You asked, what do we cut?
Roads. How do we
Amazingly-
get more money for roads?
Amazingly, when you cut taxes, it doesn't always mean you get less money. We cut these taxes from 5% down to 4.63, and we had the most
And the
explosive
state has
and the
never
most
recovered.
explosive
The state
economic
never- we
condition.
cut taxes
Can I
permanently
please
in
finish this?
1999. You've interrupted me throughout this debate.
If
We
you
cut
believe,
taxes
if
in
you believe,
1999,
if
and
you
we have
believe
never
that since
recovered.
Guys, no one can hear
1999
you both talking at the same time. So I will help out
Which
and
is
actually be able
usually
to,
his goal.
But I will.
So if-
and then no. I will go ahead and be the next person. I think. Do you have another question? I'll go. Okay. So we keep dancing around these different taxes, John. It's well, there's this other tax and this other fee. This is still taking $160 million away from the state budget. And since Tabor has passed, I don't know exactly how many times, but it has been extraordinarily difficult for the government of Colorado to ask and then win a tax increase of any sort. I think Ref C is probably one of the only ones they've been able to actually make happen.
Except for the marijuana tax, yes.
Marijuana tax and Ref C. So for 28 years, they've only been able to raise taxes once. Once this goes down,
It's such a fib.
what other tax? Okay, so
Just because
your
you call
claim
a
is that
tax
it's
a
just
fee,
fees. Okay,
because you call a tax a fee doesn't make a difference to my wallet. Tell the guy in the hospital bed that it's a tax.
there.
Tell the hospital that's dealing with uncompensated care that they shouldn't leverage federal dollars that are made available with a match that they pay
All
and
I
then
was
get those
asking for-
dollars back down.
All I was asking
No,
for is
it's about-
consent. All I was asking
People
for
can't,
is consent.
people can't consent when they have incomplete or false information, which is what
Oh,
you
those
provide
stupid-
every single time.
Those stupid voters. We can't ask
No,
them to approve.
the voters
we can't ask them to approve
the voters
hospital provider
deserve
fee.
to
We can't ask them to
understand
prefer
what we will
the
cut from the
faster fee.
budget. John, what will we cut from the budget?
We've paid for this tax
will we cut?
over and over. I
What
would
will
love
you-
to cut things.
So how will we fund
including-
the roads? And don't give me some small
Fund the road.
fund that gives
Do you
something
support
to
closing
studios.
more loopholes? For instance,
No.
now give me just 15 seconds.
You have 10 because we're going to closing statements.
The governor just created, out of thin air, $170 million a year by 2 bills he passed. That more than compensates for this short tax cut. It's why he supports this, because it's already been paid for.
I promised only 10. You got 12. I've told you many times here that a half an hour goes by very quickly in the studio, especially in issues like this. It is now time for our closing statements. We offer each of our representatives 30 seconds. A coin flip before the program determined that John would go first. John, your 30-second closing statement.
You deserve a small tax break. The governor, our Democratic governor, believes you deserve some tax relief. Prop 116 does that. But let's remember, we're not operating in a vacuum. We are working with other states that have more competitive tax codes. Why are more businesses leaving high-tax states like California and New York and Illinois to go to Texas, Florida, Nevada, and Wyoming? They have no income tax there at all. This tax is paid for more by rich people, percentage-wise. You deserve a little of your own money back. Vote yes.
Thank you, John. Scott, it's time for your 30-second closing statement.
You deserve communities that work, and you deserve the truth. At the end of the day, when you look at Proposition 116, you should do the math. Do you think you'd rather have $40 in your pocket, or would you rather have functioning schools? Would you rather have good roads? And would you rather have a state, because I think we want to live in Colorado, that you can be proud of? At the end of the day, because of how unfair our tax system is in the state of Colorado, this tax cut will overwhelmingly benefit wealthy Coloradans who don't need $800 in their pocket and will be just fine with underpaid teachers, with broken roads, and poor health care. At the end of the day, Coloradans need to understand what's at stake with this tax cut. Vote no on Proposition 116.
That is indeed all the time we have for our debate about the proposed tax cut in Colorado. I'd like to thank our issue representatives, John Caldara and Scott Wasserman, and also to thank my fellow panelist, John Frank from the Colorado Sun. If you'd like to find out more information about this or any of the general election issues and races, please visit our websites at pbs12.org, coloradosun.com, and, of course, cbs4.com. And be sure to stay tuned because coming up next is our look at the candidates looking to replace George Brockler as district attorney for the 18th district. It's sure to be a good debate. We hope you tune in for that. And as you've known throughout the season, we started right after Labor Day. Every Friday night we offer two debates at 7 and 7:30. That continues. We'll, as we run out of ballot issues in October, we're going to both sides of the story. But all of those issue debates can be found online at pbs12.org and, of course, coloradosun.com. So you can stay informed on all these issues. They clearly need a lot of analysis. You saw what just a half an hour can provide, and there may even be more questions than answers provided here. So be sure to go to our websites to check it out. For everybody here at Colorado Decides, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you so much for watching. Good night.